In the first video, we had set up a very basic simple authentication runner, which basically redirected the user to the GitHub authentication page once they spin up their local host. Let's see what we had built in the previous video, and then we can move on with what we are going to build next. So here I have a very basic OAuth runner. We have an index, which we had used in the previous video, where we have our OAuth application running. We have a container, and we also have the runner, Springboot, and we also have the application.yaml, which has the client secret and the client ID from GitHub. So if you haven't seen the previous video, I would really highly recommend you to see the first video. The link is also in the description below. Now that we have our authentication running, always make sure that you're running your Springboot application or your local host on an incognito web page, so that there's no cookie and you are not automatically logged into GitHub. So just make sure that you're always running it in a incognito window. So let's have a new private window for us, and here we'll start running our application. So we have localhost 8080, and as we open that, we are automatically redirected to GitHub here, and then you can put in your information, hit sign in, and once you are authenticated, you will be sent back to the local host and you will be displayed as Springboot OAuth application. So this is what we had built in our previous video, where we had a simple application, and now in this video we'll start adding features to this particular web application that we have. So now that you see, we only are redirected once we just log in or spin up the application. How about we give user a choice or a conditional choice where they can then decide if they want to log in via GitHub or not, and then show them the name back. So for example, my name is Ronak, and if I want to log into GitHub, I just have a button which says click here to log into GitHub. When I log in, it shows me that I have been logged in as Ronak Vyas with my GitHub user information. So let's start adding features into our application so that we can build that. So how are we going to do this? So in this video, we'll modify the simple application that we have, and we'll do that by adding an explicit link to log in with GitHub. Instead of being redirected immediately, the new link will be visible on the homepage. The user can choose to log in or stay unauthenticated. So they have two options. Only when the user has clicked on the link with the secure content be rendered. So this is called as conditional content, and we'll be doing that on the homepage, which is the index.html. Now, to render content on the condition that the user is authenticated, you have the option of doing it at the server side using Spring Boot and Java, or on the client side using jQuery. In this video, we'll be doing it in jQuery, but you can easily refactor the code for any of your JavaScript libraries such as React or Angular. So let's start and let's see how we can build this. So we have our application here, we have the login. So let's change this to video 2. So all we can do is have a login page which gives you the choice to log in or not using GitHub, and we'll say conditional. Yep, great. And now we can add our stuff here. So let's have a body. So we have the body ready. Now we have the container, and let's have two divs now. So first div is going to be unauthenticated, and this one will have via GitHub. So GitHub, and here we have an A tag which links to the URL which we use inside GitHub, which is going to be /OAuth2/authorization/ GitHub, not GitHub, GitHub. So whenever the user clicks this particular button, so click here, they will be redirected to the /OAuth/authorization/GitHub URL, and this is basically where we then hit the GitHub server and we start the authorization process. So now let's see how we can demonstrate conditional content. So this is a one div which we have. So let's make sure that everything inside body is indentated. Let's have another div, and here we'll be having another class. So let's have a class container. This is going to be authenticated, and using these two sets of classes we'll be showing the content. And let's first not display it, so we'll do display none, so it is hidden first and we will not be able to see this. And this will basically say logged in as, and this is going to be a span, and this is going to be having an ID of user. So we have ID, it's going to be user. So this is currently empty, but we'll be using jQuery to actually fill this particular span. So let's start writing the script for that. So everything jQuery goes inside script, inside HTML. Make sure that the script is of type text / JavaScript. So that is what we are implementing right now. And let's write some very simple jQuery which just fetches everything that we want, the data of the basically the name of the person who has been authenticated using GitHub, and then we can move ahead from there. So we have $get, and let's say we have /user, which is basically how we get our info back. We'll be implementing the /user endpoint in a minute, and then we have a function. The function is going to have data in it, so we'll be using the data. And now let's start implementing things inside here. So inside data, we are going to have, we'll be using jQuery again, and what we tell jQuery is that whenever you find the ID user, take the .html and add data.name inside that. That is something, that is the first thing we should do, that we make sure that we fill the span with the name which we get back from GitHub. The next thing what we do is we take up unauthenticated. So what we tell jQuery is that take the class unauthenticated and hide it. So this div is hidden once we log in, once we get data back from GitHub. And the next thing what we do is the same thing, but we show authentication. So dot authenticated, and all we have to do is dot show. So we don't need semicolons here, we can work without them as well. And this is basically how we have conditional content on our HTML page using client-side jQuery. So what is happening here? Let's go step by step again. We have two divs. One div is unauthenticated, the other one is authenticated. The authenticated div is initially displayed as none, so we don't see this initially, we just see login via GitHub. Click here. Once we click here and we are redirected back to our local application, we get a data back from GitHub using the endpoint /user. We will be implementing this in a minute. Once we get the data back, we fill the span with the data name, we hide an authenticated div, and we show the div which is authenticated. So this is our client-side code which we will be using to make sure that we have everything set up ready from the client side. The next part is running the server-side code. So the /user endpoint. Now we'll be adding the server-side endpoint that we just mentioned, calling it /user. It will send back the currently logged in user, which we can quite easily do so in our main OAuth runner class. So let's see how we do that. So first we'll be adding a REST controller here. So if you're not familiar with REST controllers, please watch the REST API playlist from using Springboot in the Programming Knowledge channel, and the link will also be in the description below. We will call this a REST application. We will have a get mapping. The get mapping will be for, as you expected, /user, and this is going to be for another method that we have. It's going to be public return a map of string and object, and let's make sure that we have the map imported from util, and this is going to be called user. Now inside this we will be having a lot of things, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Let me just implement it first. So we have authenticated application principal. We have OAuth2 user. Let's call it the principal. Yep. The next thing which we need to do is implement it. So we get the data in principal, and now we need to return back the name from the principal object. So we do return collections, not an empty map. We go with singleton map, and we have the name, the key as the name, and the value is going to be principal dot get attribute, and we get back the name. This is the endpoint which we call back. So let's talk about what's happening here. So here what we're doing is we make sure that whenever we hit the slash user endpoint here, we get the OAuth user which we currently have at that time, so your GitHub user, and we get back the name of the user from that, and we put that in a map, and we then access the key of the map from the value. So we access the value calling data.name. So this is the name that we have, and we call data.name, and we get back the principal.get attribute. So this is how we get back our name from the OAuth user. And the last thing that we need to do here is make sure that our application or the home page is public. So this is the one final change that we need to make. The app will work fine now and authenticate as before, but it's still going to redirect before showing the page. To make the link visible, we also need to switch off the security on home page by extending web security configurer adapter. So let's say what we mean by that. So let's actually add that. First, we extend our application, extends web security configurer adapter. So we'll be extending this, and let's actually write our function. So we override protected void configure, and we have HTTP security. It's called HTTP. This throws exception. Let's implement it. So we don't have to implement it. We have it right here from the Spring docs which we are following. So let me just get it right from there, and we'll just talk about what it's doing. And let's import all the classes that we want to make sure that we have everything ready. Let's clean it up a bit just to make sure that everything looks good. Yep, looks about right. So let's talk about what's happening here. So Springboot attaches special meaning to a web security configurer adapter on the class annotated with Springboot application right here. It uses it to configure the security filter chain that carries the OAuth2 authentication processor. Now the above configuration indicates a whitelist of permitted endpoints. So these endpoints are permitted and they will not be secure, and we can always access it. So how are we doing it? So we want to allow slash, since that the page you just made dynamic with some of its content visible to unauthenticated user. So as you see, this is unauthenticated and we want the user to see it. So we need to make sure that this is also permitted by the web security configurer adapter. Next is the slash error, since that's a Springboot endpoint for displaying errors, and slash webjars, since you'll want your JavaScript to run for all visitors, authenticated or not. Now you won't see anything about slash user in this configuration, though everything including slash user remains secure unless indicated by this particular request. So we only give slash the permit, we don't give slash user the permit because that is where the authorization is happening. We just want to make sure that the unauthenticated user can see slash. Now finally, since we are interfacing with the backend over Ajax, we want to configure the endpoints to respond with a 401 instead of that. We make sure that the authentication entry point is also unauthorized. With those changes in place, the application is complete. And when we run it and visit the homepage, we should see a very simple basic HTML which says login via GitHub. The link takes you not directly to GitHub, but to the local path that processes the authentication, which is /user. Once you're authenticated, you will be redirected back to the homepage where it displays the name. So let's run this and see how we have worked. Just to make sure that we are doing it correctly, we have extended web security, we have our /user endpoint, we have implemented everything that we need, and we should be good to go. So let's make sure that we are, and let's run this. We have the server up and it started running. Everything looks good. Let's open a private window, very important. No cookies, it'll be easy to see what's happening. Open 8080. And as you can see, the HTML is not perfect, but we can always update that. And we have via GitHub, click here. When we click here, we are redirected to this with our client ID, which I have in my application.yaml, which we had in the previous video. We give our inputs, we sign in, and when we sign in, we get back to our local application with our name. So logged in as non-affairs. So this is how you have a welcome page and a conditional content in your home page. In the next video, we'll add a logout button and we'll take it there, and we'll also start building up our fully authenticated OAuth2 application using Springboot and GitHub. If you have any questions, please add them into the comments, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.